Good evening. Welcome to Speaking of Music. I'm Charles Amerkanian. Our guest tonight is Keith Jarrett. As many of you know, he revolutionized the art of the solo piano concert in the improvised music tradition, and by extending and making into very, very long lines music which in the past was played in shorter bursts, he did something which has really changed the course of improvised music history. For me, his music combines the spiritual and the secular in a very exciting and very deep way. And I'd like to have you all welcome Keith Jarrett, who has some very interesting music to play for us tonight, some new things. Keith? Keith has been doing some music which is extremely different from what all of us know, and I think I'd like him to introduce what the genesis of all of this new activity is and how you do it, and play some of it for us to start out.
Okay, well, I had a breakdown in May. Let's see, that's how it started.
You turned 40.
The genesis was the breakdown, because the breakdown was symbolic in many respects. I had a so-called classical career that had been finally, I think, accepted by quite a few of the so-called critics and the so-called listeners, and even the so-called musicians. And when that happened, and I simultaneously... who knows what turning 40 had to do with it, but it probably had a lot to do with it. I realized that that wasn't what I was here to do. Again. I think I realized it before, but I forgot it for a while. And it wasn't that I did the wrong thing up to that moment. It was I did all the right things, but now it was time to stop them and do something else. And the something else was picking up an instrument and making music on it, which sounds simplistic, I guess. But I started to realize that if I could forget about that, with my history of doing it, that there was the reason why I had to keep representing making music rather than playing music. So I stopped playing music and started to make music again. That's sort of a simple way of putting it. But when I started picking up these instruments, something happened, some connection happened to my original reason for making music became even more important. And it's just coming through on these tapes. They were made on 2 cassette recorders. And there is no sequence I would use for this. I would just start playing something that I heard. If I heard a tabla drum, then I would play a tabla drum. If I heard a recorder, I would play that. If there was a melody, I would write it down. If there wasn't a melody, there wouldn't be one. If there was a rhythm and no melody, then there was a rhythm and no melody. And if there was an instrument that I added that was one too many, then I would use the last track before that. And that's how it worked. And some of them started with flute. If there's drums and flute, let's say, some of them started with the flute, and then there would be drums. But the flute wasn't thinking of drums while it played its thing. The flute was only thinking about what it was doing.
Have you played the flute before?
Recorders, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm familiar with them. But another thing is I play better on these tapes than I can play. And it is funny to say it like that, but when your intent is pure enough, you can do what you intend, despite your technical limitations. And you don't do more than that. Many of you might have known people from other countries. When they try to speak English, they speak much clearer to you than you speak to them, because they don't know enough words to confuse you. So they'll say, I don't know. And you know they don't know. But when you say you don't know, I don't know. It's not very convincing, you know. You can say, I'm not sure. And they don't even know the words for that. So if you've ever seen Liv Ullmann do an interview, you know what I'm talking about. How are you feeling, Liv? Well. And before she says a word, you know exactly how she's feeling about a lot of things, especially interviews. Now, I don't know exactly where to start. If you want me to do something?
Yeah, let's hear some of the music, then we can maybe ask you some questions.
I had a plan, but I'm going to go completely against my plan. And I'm going to play the very first thing that I recorded that I thought was a permanent representation of what was going on. And this music, there's 3 hours of it, at least. There's probably more than 3 hours. There's maybe 3.5 hours of it. So I can't play a representational grouping of these things because each one is unique. So if one of them sounds like blah, 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 that doesn't mean that the next one would. But you might not hear the next one. But taken all together, I think it's music that has, I would say, that the earth wants to hear. Something like that. And I don't mean to refer to anything silly like New Age music, whatever that means. Is it okay if I play the next one, which is just real short? I think you'll get an idea how different each track is.
How do you do this with 2 cassette machines? I don't understand how do you do that?
I don't know either. See,
You're recording on one, you play it back, and at the same time record a second layer?
Yeah, I'm using a mixing board, but I'm only using 2 tracks at any given time. And I have a studio, which is really a garage. It's in the woods, and it's in Indian country, which is, I think, one of the influences on these tapes, perhaps. But most music of the soul seems to have sounded the same long ago, as we mentioned earlier. So I'm not sure how much it has to do with the Indians or how much the Indians and that music has to do with itself. But I have 2 mics and a little toy mixing board. And
what's Manfred Eicher think of this? He's going to have to put
well,
these
Manfred,
out, right?
unfortunately, is interested in releasing these, and I'm not sure what he's going to find out about the masters.
Any questions that come to mind right away from? Yes, right here.
Well, I guess whenever you start taking up music, I've played for a long time myself. You originally had a feeling for whatever you did, and then I guess as you get more proficient, it's harder to get locked into a certain technique. Maybe you could talk a little bit about where the term might have gone to take away from the original feeling that you had for music. And it's harder when you play like piano because you've been so proficient with that for so long, and still picking up some new instrument and approaching it sort of freshly.
Did everyone? Well, I didn't plant him in the audience, but that's a question I hoped would come up, and it's the first one. He sort of is questioning about what happens when you get proficient at something, and you know how. I guess you want to know my personal experiences of that. How you can lose the touch with the music, I guess. See, I don't think you necessarily can lose touch with it if you ever touched it. I wouldn't say I lost touch with it in the period of time that I was doing whatever I was doing. I mean, it was all part of the same thing. But we don't all know why we're on the earth, and I realized why I was on the earth again in a rather radical manner in that May period of this last year. But technique is nothing. And it can supplant what is there. I mean, it's like if somebody has something to say and they have a script, they don't have to think for themselves on the spot. Well, if we all lived with a script, it would be like that. You know, we'd have our technique together, and we'd come and actually we do that, but we don't realize it. You know, we have our personalities, and our personalities are our script. And we bring our personalities with us, and after a while, we need our personalities because all our friends wouldn't recognize us without them, because they have theirs, and their personalities recognize ours. But music and communication of any kind should come from zero, not from personality. Personality doesn't live at zero, so personality doesn't know anything about what goes on except at a certain level. So let's say that you're a pianist or a musician of some kind, and you've been working very hard with this. I just had this experience, which I think might apply. I wrote a piece for the American Indian, and it was just recently played, and it was for flute, cello, clarinet, and piano. And it was Richard Stoltzman, Paula Robeson, Fred Sherry, and myself. And it was, at the last minute, I thought there should be some percussion instruments in this piece. And I don't know how these people are going to feel about singing, but I'd like them to sing if they feel like it. And I'd like them to hit these things too sometimes. And I took them in to the rehearsal. And one of the very first things that happened is Richard Stoltzman, who's probably one of the better clarinet players in the world as far as classical music is concerned, forgot to come in where he was supposed to because he liked ringing his bells. And he said, Fred tapped him on the shoulder with his bow. He said, Rich, I'm sorry. I said, please don't say you're sorry. This is wonderful. This is great. We'll change this beginning. Paul is playing something alone, and then Richard's supposed to come in. And Richard said, no, don't change it for me. I said, I'm not changing it for you. I'm changing it for the bells, for the music. So you come in anytime you want because she'll finish her thing, and then we'll play, and then when she sees you picking up the clarinet, she can play her last phrase again, and you can come in. Well, that showed me that anybody at any level of proficiency can suddenly remember that. You know, they can suddenly remember that music doesn't have anything to do with how well they play their instrument, really. It actually has less to do with that than how well they make coffee in the morning. Think about that.
I always wanted to know what happens in your orchestra pieces where you have an improvised section for one of the soloists. What do you notate actually on the score?
Like, for example, what?
Arbor Zena, saxophone solo.
Oh, well, Arbor Zena, the things with Jan Garbarek were written for Jan, knowing his playing, and also Jan flew over to check the sketches out to see whether he'd feel comfortable with those sections. But he already, when he got to my place, he realized I had been listening to him better than he listened to himself. He said, you have a lot of thirds in here, and I thought I liked fourths. I said, listen to your records. You've got a lot of descending thirds with half steps in them. I thought it was something you'd appreciate in here. He said, oh, yeah, come to think of it, I do that.
So all of that's written out? None of it's
No,
improvised?
but I mean, there was a way of dealing with the improvised sections where if I had written those chords for, let's say, Phil Woods, he wouldn't have liked it very much, probably, because it wouldn't be like chord progression. It was more like a chord on top of a pedal, or a scale on top of pedals, or a moving thing like that. So in that case, it was written for the player.
Could the piece be played by other instrumentalists? Has it been played by other people?
Well, not Pete Jolly, he's a pianist. David Jolly, who's a French horn player, has been working on it for French horn. I don't know. He doesn't know yet, though, which parts are improvised and which parts aren't. So as far as I know, he's learned to play all of Jan's solos. He's probably the only French horn player that that could do an imitation of Jan Garbarek. And by the way, Jan Garbarek's the only tenor player that can do a convincing imitation of Miles Davis, which has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
Any other questions? Nothing? Yes.
How do you feel when you listen back to some of the extended solo piano pieces that you've been doing in the last 5 or 10 years? If you listen to them now, how does it move you?
I don't listen to them now. I'm not in love with the piano recently. You know, I go to Japan and before I have my 2 days of jet lag or 3 days of jet lag before I do my concerts, and I walk into any shop anywhere or any place, building, and they're playing either George Winston or any number of people who might have his name. And
I was
I
introduced
got
to
so
him
tired
in
of the
cafe.
piano being in Japan that I can't get used to it anymore right now. I luckily have a harpsichord that I feel close to, but there's a time for things, you know, for everybody. And my time of being the fan of the piano is not at the moment. I think of it as too sophisticated an instrument right now for what I'm hearing.
You brought such special qualities to the Bartók concerto. Are you saying then that this is something that you would no longer be interested in repeating?
The question was, you brought special qualities to the Bartók concerto. Is that something you wouldn't repeat?
If I repeated qualities, I'd be a machine. Yeah, I think I know what you mean, but I'm not sure what you mean by repeating.
Would you perform these things in public anymore?
Bartók?
Yes.
Well, I found out. I work a year and a half or so on a particular piece like the Samuel Barber Concerto, which I liked as a kid, and I sort of wanted to pay back Samuel Barber for having written it and for my feeling about it. And I played it 3 times and thought, that's all I care about playing this piece, 3 times. And if I'm going to work a year and a half on a piece to play it 3 times, I'm sure there's something better I could do in that year and a half. And I found out that in a month, I can have 3 hours of music that's unrepeatable even by me. I mean, I can't even get close to some of the music on here if I wanted to.
You say you're more interested in perhaps the harpsichord now. Would you ever return to the organ, as in the hymns and spheres?
Well, even the organ was something that was I heard, and it went into my system, out of my system, and I'm not sure it will ever recur. But you see, there's a purity in that that's impossible to get by repeated anythings. Like repeating, I had that very experience. Some of these, for example, if I had my tape recorder volume wrong, which was very easy to do since I was my own engineer and I running back between 2 rooms all the time, guessing at where everything should be, and then using the headphones as a guide to what the balance would be on these tapes. There were several occasions when I had to do something over, and I could never do it over. The first take was it.
And you couldn't have done these with an engineer either, probably.
I couldn't have done these with an engineer at all, no. And I would wake up, I had breakfast, I went out to the studio, and whether I jotted something down or not, it was just immediate. It was like the connection between closing the door of the studio, being in the room with the instruments, and hearing which instrument should be played. And, you know, I'm even, up until the time I left here, I'm still working on some stuff there because this gave me the feeling that if I can do that in a month, I should be able to do more in a couple months. That's not true. You can do it when you can do it. And I was lucky enough to be able to do it when I could do it. I mean, I feel very fortunate. I started writing some notes about this stuff, and I realized that if I died, I would feel like I accomplished exactly everything I had to accomplish. Which doesn't mean I'm wishing to die now. But it's a wonderful feeling that I can't even remember until I listen again to some of this and realize how there's no way this could be done at any other time even by me.
Could we hear some more?
Yeah. Again, I'm choosing. Someone had their hand up. I don't know if. Oh.
Go.
When you're creating this music, do you, and you mentioned something about finding out what your life is about. What is your relationship to the larger audience that may or may not ever be there for this music? Do you think about that? Is that part of it?
Do you know that the universe, the solar system, uses an incredibly small fraction of the energy the sun gives off, and that scientists actually think that's wasted energy? Well, that's my answer.
everybody in a state of shock. Any questions? Yes.
Basic and simple, maybe in my ignorance they're not so simple, I don't know, is that,
Maybe what?
in my ignorance of the instruments, they're not as simple as I think they are. Is that a correct assumption?
The question is, did you choose the instruments because they're very basic and simple?
There's two reasons I chose the instruments. One is that they were very basic and simple. The other is that they were laying around. But the fact that they were laying around was because I had been collecting instruments that were very basic and simple. And unknowing to myself, I was collecting exactly the instruments that I needed for this. I didn't go out anywhere to find anything. Before I started these, everything was in the studio. And in fact, I decided that if it couldn't be done with the instruments in the studio, then it wasn't, we weren't talking about music anyway. It was going to be able to be done with those things. But yes, I think that there was a poet who I'm not sure who it was, but he said that whatever the most intimate thing is, it's also the most universal. And you cannot get close to a complex thing in the same way that you can get close to something that's touched directly. So in that sense, the recorder is something you're just putting your breath in and it doesn't have mechanisms. The tabla drums are one of the most expressive instruments in the world. Not that I was using them always that way, but everything I ended up using, I could rationalize after it and say that there was definitely a reason to use them. You know. And the piano plays such a subordinate role in these tapes. It's quite often on the tapes, but it has nothing to do with being a piano. It has something to do with setting up something, but there's no pianistic stuff on these tapes.
One more question over here.
Yeah, I wonder how you would parallel technique with so-called knowledge of music, and then also if you would be interested in possibly taking some inspired, say, real estate agents or something and giving them a bunch of instruments and having them play something.
If they were real estate agents and they were inspired, I'd have some doubts about whether. I'd rather take some uninspired real estate agents. I don't know if you can say what his question was, but
I didn't quite understand what you meant by the first part of the question.
You said about technique not being really important to what you're trying to do at this time. You're
Well,
taking some non-musicians and have them.
okay, let me tell you what I really. It doesn't matter if you didn't understand his question, because the question is about technique and whether it's even more interesting and even possibly more valid, I think, to use to have people play music who are not proficient musicians, right? Well, I've had the experience of doing that several times because I have found that it is a tremendous experience usually for everyone involved. And however, to put yourself in the music is no mean feat. So if you don't know what you're doing, you are accidentally there and accidentally not there. If you do know what you're doing, which would not include inspired real estate agents, would include only musicians, if you are willing to take the risk of throwing away everything you do, but not throwing away anything you know, you can then make music. It would take those inspired real estate agents would have to have at least one master musician playing with them for there to sound like anything was going on, you know. But they and probably the musician would have a great time, but I'm not sure they could effect anything. I mean, have an effect. In fact, when I started to do these tapes, I started to think, and I've had this idea for a long time. Why can't I do this with other people? It wouldn't work. In a way, I justified for myself, I justified the technology of recording only now with these tapes. I've never really seen a valid use of it for myself. Everything seems negative about it. And these things have proven, at least to me, that if I really hear it, if what I'm hearing really should be played, and I can play it, then it can be heard on these tapes, you know. But if I hired a tabla drummer, he'd play his tabla stuff, you know, and if I hired a flautist, he'd play his little flute phrases. But if it's me and I'm in the right state, it doesn't mean it has to be me, but whoever it is, if they're in the right state and they know enough about their tools that they aren't going to be just completely foolishly playing notes that they don't know anything about, but are willing to sacrifice the little mistakes that we aren't usually associating with professional musicians, then maybe something would happen.
It's funny because it seems right now, grassroots participation in music is going to take the direction, come the turn of the century, of everybody having their own digital synthesizers at home. That's what it's going to be, it looks like, at this point. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that I'm glad I am doing what I'm doing then. See, there's a difference between playing with music and making music. And I think synthesizers are going to push forward the playing with music to the point that people think they're making music, when actually making music demands a certain discipline and lack of hearing the thing you're thinking of right away. You have to go through that period where what you hear cannot be heard physically. Synthesizers erase that whole period of time. If you can play it, you can hear it right away. And if you want a trumpet to play it, the trumpet will be playing it for you. So that's playing with music, as far as I'm concerned. I think that you know, I've seen, believe it or not, to me this is unbelievable, but in the New York Times there was a weekend when they were talking about electronic music. One of the article's headings was "Electronic music, computer music is alive and well." Okay, that was one. In another of those articles, these were written by the top music critics in the world, according to the people that think New York is the greatest city in the world. And who knows what the greatest city means anyway, since we know what cities are. Anyway, believe it or not, one of these very sophisticated guys wrote this thing, and he said that actually the West Coast computer music people were starting to sound like the West Coast, and the East Coast guys, there were the East Coast academics and there were the West Coast laid-back people, and and it was coming through in the computer music, you see. And I wrote a response to these articles, which they'll never publish. And they have it, though, at the New York Times. Unfortunately, it's about 16 pages long. But the cover page said this: what has music come to when you can say, if you can say the Californians sound Californian and the Northeasterners sound Northeastern, and you're using that as a justification for computer music, and it's like a big thing to you, then, I mean, anyone that writes a letter, a West Coast letter, looks like a West Coast letter, right? You can tell whether the guy is living in Vermont or in L.A. What does that have to do with music? I mean, wow.
Well,
And then they talk about world music. You know, like, this is world music. What world? You know, smaller than the Indians. That's, I mean, the Indians' music, why was the American Indian music, and let's say all the primitive musics in all the parts of the world, why do they sound so similar? They sound similar because of a connection. They don't sound similar because they heard it on the media.
In a category?
Say that again?
Did New York attempt to put the Harrison Concerto, which you played?
Did New York attempt to put the Lou Harrison Piano Concerto, which he just played, in a category?
Oh, I don't know. I actually forgot the review.
I saw it. It wasn't much.
Yeah.
It didn't say much about the piece, actually. Unfortunately, it doesn't describe. Most critics don't describe pieces well. They give opinions very well, but they don't describe.
Well, on the American Indian piece that just got finished being played in New York, I also played Bach with Richard Stoltzman, and the whole review, with the exception of 2 sentences about Bach, was about my liner notes for the piece. And a few other things, like that it was a string of melodies, and it was attractive, and blah blah blah. But it was one of those things where if a guy lives in New York and gets paid by New York to do his job, he certainly isn't going to be able to think outside of the scope of New York City. I mean, he's using that city. Anyway, we all know these things.
Let me ask you something. I'd like to point out.
It doesn't have anything to do with music either. I'm wasting your time.
I'd like to point out one similarity, though. If you're working in a recording studio and you're playing a track and then playing another track, you're working directly with the sound in the same way that a person who wants to use, let's say, complex and almost inhumanly difficult rhythms would do with a computer's synthesizers. So is there in your mind a difference between the person who achieves these rhythms the way Conlon Nancarrow does on the player piano and the way somebody might do who's younger, who would do them directly on a synthesizer? Working directly with the sound, hearing what it is.
Well, I don't know. I guess we could talk about that, but actually, I think it's not worth talking about.
Is it the sound that bothers you of the coming out of the speakers, or the act of not having the?
Are the people
contact?
okay? Is what I'm worried about. Okay, I mean, we all, in the end, we all have to know ourselves, I mean, where we're at. So I can't really say that blah, blah, blah isn't okay and blah, blah, blah is. I can only see the results of blah, blah, blah. If I see that those results are bad for me, I can only assume that if I know how sensitive I am, and I can only assume that if that's physiological to some extent, that it does not only apply to me. The whole story of fluorescent lights is the same. People used to come home, they worked under fluorescent lights, and they would say, I don't know what's wrong with me. I have headaches, I don't know. I hate my job, I don't know what's going on. And then they go back to work, and I think, it's something about the lights. No. I never read that in Scientific American. So, and then all of a sudden in Scientific American, there's an article that says fluorescent lights are missing a certain range of light waves that the eye needs, and that those cells move and just kind of hang out in a corner of your eye. Then now those people finally, after those years, they are able to say, oh, well, then it wasn't me. But they're not willing to say it wasn't them when they already knew it was the lights. Well, what I'm saying is that music affects me in a certain way, sound affects me in a certain way, and I have a body, and it's very similar to everyone else's. And I have learned that, first of all, a musician ought to be a little more sensitive to sound. That isn't always the case, ladies and gentlemen, but let's assume it was the case, and let's assume that you could be objective. And let's just for a minute think of how many things we are not able to be objective about. If we know how many of those things there are, then if someone's able to be objective about one of those things, and you can see the results in his work, that there's something valuable there that you feel is missing when you listen to other things, then there's something in it, and you shouldn't wait for Scientific American. And that's what I'm saying about electronic music and computer music. Actually, at this point, it doesn't affect me either way, because since I don't listen to it, I'm not affected by it.
Well, the loudspeaker being the instrument, you're listening to all your music on loudspeakers now.
Well, you have to make sacrifices, yes.
Yes, over here.
I'm a little perplexed. Why the choice of only 2 tracks for the performer? can understand the inward composer looking to create, but to communicate that to everyone else, the outward audience, would not have more tracks made it easier for you to communicate that inward composition?
No, because I had to get into the studio as fast as my legs could carry me to make the music.
Why did you have to go to the studio to make the goddamn music? That's what I don't understand.
My instruments were in there.
You talk about loudspeaker music, and you talk about how offensive it is.
Wait a minute, he talked about loudspeaker music.
But you were saying that you don't, that
You're saying electronic and synthesizer music.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, but see, I also heard him talking about the fact that in order for it to be music, it comes from these primal sources, and that you're avoiding electronic means.
Who said that?
Okay, I thought that you implied that.
Well, I will imply that now. You know what? I'll tell you, of all the things that interest me about electronic music and these questions, the biggest thing that I'm interested in right now is why those questions come from you. I mean, why is it a big question? I don't have a question about it. It's interesting that people are confused about it. To me, that means something. That means there's a reason for that confusion. I wouldn't bring those subjects up in this whole evening, and nor if we talked for 3 days, would I ever bring up the subject of electronic instruments on my own. I know what I'm doing. Yes.
You mentioned that you had a bad feeling about recorded music. I think that maybe that's what she was referring to.
Recorded music.
Recorded music. You said this was the first time that it was justified somehow. Do you feel that more, everybody should just be playing live music, or there should be more of it as opposed to recordings?
I don't know what anybody else should do. Maybe you can ask.
You were speaking about your own compositional work, I think, in that reference,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
He was saying that there was no previous need for him to have recordings for compositional purposes, I think.
Not for the performance that you presented to the public.
What I was trying to say was I find more negative things about recordings than positive things.
Including recordings of your piano
Yeah.
concerts, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And this project, in a way, in many ways, justified the process of recording for me because it couldn't exist in any other way. So, yeah. I don't know who I'm saying yes to.
Can we hear more music, George?
Okay, how much time do we have in this segment?
Oh. 10 minutes.
Okay. I'd like to play 2 things in a row, if you don't mind waiting that long for the questions to be answered about electronic music.
I'd like to begin the second half with a couple of questions for Mr. Jarrett. First of all, Keith, the trip to Japan, could you give us an idea of what you are doing these days? What will you be doing in Japan?
Well, I'm doing the Lou Harrison Concerto. I'm doing my recent American Indian tribute piece, and I'm doing 2 duets with a 75-year-old lady who plays the biwa, which is a Japanese string instrument.
Improvised?
Improvised, yeah. In Tokyo and Osaka. She's a national treasure of Japan, by the way, which I don't know if many of you might not know. They do that over there, which is one of the nice things to know, that certain people are considered valuable.
What is her name?
Madame Tsuruta. I hope so. We probably tape 1 or 2. We did 1 duet already. That's why we decided we'd like to play together twice.
Could you just say a few words about the Lou Harrison Concerto? We haven't heard it here. You're going to play it here April 11th. How's it constructed? 3 movements, 4 movements?
Okay, it has 4 movements. It's I wouldn't want to talk about how it's constructed because I'm not sure Lou knows either. But that's a positive thing. But it uses the piano, and especially the tuning of the piano, in a unique way. The piano is tuned to an old temperament, supposedly one of Bach's favorite harpsichord temperaments, and which makes the piece sound very strange if the string players play in tune.
So they have to retune.
So they have to try to play their open strings, not to play their open strings, and play their open string notes flat, mostly. And I don't know, I haven't even thought about the form of the piece when I play it. It has a kind of flow that each movement, I think of each movement as a separate thing. And I think that's the way Lou writes, because he does his stampedes and his rags, or whatever he...
So it's more like a suite than like a traditional concerto.
I feel like it's a suite. It doesn't have the kind of thematic relationships at all that you would associate with a form. The first movement is the one that seems like a traditional piano concerto, and then he lets go and does what he likes to do with some of the other things. And in the last movement, there's an interesting way of dealing with contrapuntal. It's like contrapuntal Indian music. It doesn't go from one harmony to another. It stays exactly in the same scale, but the playing of it is very much like playing a Bach counterpoint for harpsichord. And I think Lou succeeded admirably with that attempt. I don't know if I've ever heard that kind of writing before.
Everybody know who Lou Harrison is? Yeah. There's a man who should be a national treasure, along with Keith. Yeah.
Well, I'm not old enough.
No. You lived 2 lifetimes in 40 years.
I will be old enough one day. What?
Are there opportunities for improvisation?
Is there a chance to improvise in that concerto? Is the question.
No, but I do have the opportunity, if I want to, of adding my own cadenza, which is totally improvised. That's what we did in New York.
Lou has an interest in Renaissance keyboard music, and particularly the intonations. Have you talked with him about that?
Yeah, and actually he didn't know I guess we didn't know that much about each other's interests, and it turns out that, first of all, I was already playing harpsichord and he did not know that, and then I was already interested in other tunings when he said, how would you mind if we did this with 2 different temperaments? I said, oh no, it's...
2 different ones in the same
Well,
piece?
originally he was going to write a piano's concerto, which meant that there would be
several pianos.
a couple of pianos
Bring
with
one
different
out.
temperaments. He might have seen me play with Miles, I don't know. I used to play like this.
2 keyboards.
But even the temperament he's using, which is very conservative in terms of of the temperaments that have existed, Steinway in New York, the man in charge of Steinway came up to me like this and said, "Mr. Jarrett, you have to tell me about this piece." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, is it going to give us a bad name?" And I said, "What?" I really didn't know what he could have been talking about. And then he said, "Well, it's tuned differently, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, it's tuned differently." But, you know, Lou's a responsible guy. He's trying to write attractive music. I mean, you know, you ought to talk to Lou. "No, well, you know, we're really nervous." I said, "I can see that." Anyway, he thought it would, you know, now that I think about it, those reviewers could well have written what he expected them to write and said that gee, for some reason the piano sounded really out of tune. When in the liner notes there were paragraphs and paragraphs about it being a different temperament than usual and you have to accustom your ear to it, the reviewers would be just saying, "Gee, the piano's really out of tune."
Is it a difficult piece to play?
Well, I thought about that. I think it is, but I don't know, because all the techniques it utilizes are things that I feel they're a part of me in a way. I mean, you know, I have to use my arm to play some stuff, and I have to use a little thing called an octave banger. And I have to get it out of the keyboard and get it out from the inside of the piano in a split second in order to play some octaves with it like this.
It plays all the notes in an octave.
It plays all the black keys or white keys. And then I have to get back in there, and I have to do this, and I have to get it out. But see, I used to do magic tricks when I was a kid, so it's part of my technique.
Let me ask you about your family. Your mother, and on your mother's side, you were Hungarian, right?
Well, Windish, actually, which was a gypsy, kind of a gypsy thing.
Do you know when they came to this country?
The year, no, I don't, but...
It was the 19th century, or?
Yes, it was early 19th century. It was early 20th century, I'm sorry. It wasn't the 19th century.
And your father's side?
It's a real mongrel kind of thing, and there's German and French and Irish and Scottish and, you know, I don't think there are any neutral countries involved. That's why I have such a temper.
But none of your, as I understand it, when you were young, none of your family were musicians.
Well, my mother played the bass drum in the marching band in school, and my and strangely enough, it was my school, and she was already a mother. No, that was. And my grandfather played the violin when he was a kid, and there's pictures of him playing the violin, but there's pictures of everybody from Europe playing the violin when they were a kid. It's the same violin, too, by the way. But at any rate, yes, my grandmother, I feel strongly about that side. I mean, I feel that gypsy thing very strongly.
And, yeah.
Sometimes I just can't help myself.
Maybe you should speak about the violin.
I know
piece
this
that you
is a
just
serious
did,
talk. Speak about what?
Keith just wrote a piece for violin and strings, and it's called Elegy, and it's been played now, right? For the first time.
It's interesting. I don't know. Should I go on a little detour from this? But it's about this piece. I started writing. This is before that famous thing I said before, the breakdown in May. It's famous to me because I'll never forget it. I was commissioned, I think, to write something. Yes, I was commissioned by Pasadena to write an oboe, to write a piece. So I wanted to write an adagio for oboe and strings. And when I start writing, I usually start writing several things. And when I'm not writing anything. So I'm either writing a lot or not at all. And I started making a sketch for something. I had no idea what it was, but I thought a violin was playing it somehow, and it was going so fast. I remember it was in the summer. I guess this must have been a year before, yeah. And I just let the pencil do its thing, and I didn't know whether it was good or bad, and it just kept going, and I put it aside for a while, came back to it after I finished the oboe piece, because no one asked me to do this other thing, whatever it was. And every time I read through it, which was hard to do because it was really just a sketch of melodic content and very little else, I don't know why I liked it so much, but because there was nothing there. And then there was an opportunity I was doing one of these Japanese concerts which happen once a year when I have my own evening. And they were going to do the oboe piece and the violin sonata I wrote for violin and piano. And there was time for another piece, so I quickly, very, very quickly, quicker than ever before in my life, wrote this out for violin and string orchestra and quickly sent it to Japan, and they put it in the program, and I realized it was an elegy for my grandmother. And it was so outwardly Hungarian. I think, in a way, this piece was a prelude to releasing myself from what personality I had been assumed to have up to then, and allowed me to do these tapes.
What was that
Because-
personality? I don't get it.
Okay, imagine I'm not trying to write a Hungarian piece, but I wasn't afraid for it to sound as Hungarian as it sounded. It was like letting it be what it is and not caring whether it was something that sounded like a piece of mine would sound.
I see.
And when I let that go, that was the beginning of letting a lot of things go, and they fell one after another. It's a little bit long, but it's, you'd get the idea.
So that piece has been played now. How many times?
Once, only once. So far as I know, no one knows about this piece except the audience in Japan that day. I can play a little and fade it out.
Have you got it?
Yes.
That'd be great, sure.
It's a little different than the other things. Wait a minute, ladies and gentlemen. I'm lost. Now, this is one of those performances, the dress rehearsal for which was wonderful. There's a very nice cadenza there, but unfortunately you won't get to hear that tonight, ladies and gentlemen. No, that's about a third of the piece, so
Oh, it's longish.
20 some.
One movement.
Mm-hmm.
Will there be a recording?
I really don't know. Actually, see, that's one of those things about recordings. I just can't worry about that. I just do what I can do. And I remember the days when I had my desk piled with pieces that no one was interested in, and none of them had ever not only been recorded but not ever played. So I'm just thankful they're played once, and that I know they're the way I thought they were. I think composers in general share that feeling, even though they wish everything were available.
A little anxiety about that? You mean anxiety that it won't sound just right? Or?
Oh, that too. No, I meant that that when the piece exists, it exists, and hopefully it will be played and recorded and heard a lot. But just that it exists and you have approved it is a lot more than the rest of it.
You've had one record company literally the whole career.
Well,
of
not
your
really.
composing career. I mean,
Yeah.
How do you work with Manfred Eicher now in deciding what will come out in future releases? Do you talk with him on the phone? Do you get together in person?
Well, it's getting harder and harder, but somehow we've managed to break down all the things as they come up that get in the way of purely dealing with each project. But the pressures on everyone are extremely great. I mean,
You mean to have a record that will at least sell a certain number? Or
well,
for an
I assume that would be a big problem for any company, but I mean, whatever the pressures are, he's got them. I know mine, and mine are the pressures of the music itself, giving me a message and having to find how to make that message come out, you know.
And when it comes out, do you regard him as a collaborator?
Oh, yeah. Certainly there wouldn't be many producers of records at this point who'd be interested in doing these tapes that I played parts of before. They really are not professional recordings by any means. I think he lived with the tapes for a while and didn't say anything to me, and then, you know, I remember him saying, if you want to work on these tapes, I said, I wasn't even sure, to tell you the truth, whether these tapes should be released during my lifetime. But we'll see.
Yes, question?
I was wondering, you said that these tapes have been your life fulfillment. Was it when you first made this music or when you first heard it that was realized? Or both?
It's the fact that it captures what I do rather than capturing the notes. It captures more than I've heard any recordings of my own capturing, as far as where I am when I'm making the music. A student of mine and I often have talked about the important thing about making music isn't what you played or even what you're thinking of playing or are about to play. It's that split second of contact between you and the thing you're playing or hitting or blowing that determines whether it is expressing itself completely or not. There's a real good example of why a virtuoso can easily forget what music is about. You know, he's too busy with the notes.
I wanted to ask you something, Keith. Earlier you were showing me this blue book, which is called New Pathways to Piano Technique by Luigi Bonpensiere, I guess his name is,
Yeah.
with an introduction by Aldous Huxley. It was published in 1953. Its subtitle is Study of the Relations Between Mind and Body with Special Reference to Piano Playing. Do you read a lot of technique books, or is this
No.
one that you just...
This is the only one I've read because it's not really about technique, it's about volition. And so it depends on how you can bypass what's in between your intention and the result. whether the quality will be of a high, whether it will be of a high quality. I think I live in the United States, but I can't speak English.
This is almost a theosophical book more than a book on.
Well, except that it's
How to play
purely
an octave, yeah.
scientifically written to in the extent that he did experiments, and he was not himself a really capable pianist, and he was doing experiments on the piano. For example, jumping from here to the sound he wanted after hearing the sound, instead of working on the distance between here and here.
In a large
So
leap.
he would go and play the sound. And experiments with objects in the room, having met them and then being totally disoriented and coming back and having a symbol for each of those objects and being able to hit them at will the first time. So the reason I brought the book was not that I'm into this. The reason I brought the book was because it's the only book on piano technique that's of any interest at all. Other than the fact that, when the keys go down, it's so-and-so's feeling that it's all how fast your finger's going when you hit the key, and it's somebody else's feeling. The Russian technique says that depending on how you hold the key down, the second mechanism on the hammer will come down and it will release the overtones better that way. And meanwhile, because of all those books, we haven't had that many more important musics coming out. So, and it's thin.
Just the thing for a long trip, huh? Question?
I was wondering how you, having gone through periods in which I got lost in what I was doing, when I come out of my room and I need to play the music for somebody or a part of me which is left over from where I used to be, judges that. How does how do you deal with your remnants, your audience reaction? How do you deal with the fact of maybe when you get caught up in that period and not knowing what you're going to do tomorrow?
Can you?
Am I going to paraphrase that?
I don't know.
No,
I'm
I'm
not.
not.
Well, let's see. What you're asking is something to do with how the person that made some particular progress, maybe the person that might have made some progress on something in music wakes up the next day or 2 days later and goes to play and is influenced by that progress. And yet that progress is only another step, as it was a step from zero to the first place. How do you deal? I think this is, if you tell me if I'm wrong, how do you deal with being able to get rid of that and make music yet again without the memory of how good you just were, or something, or in what style you were good, or in what manner?
What thing have past which you played like the old stuff, and I have remnants of how I used to judge that, and here's your new stuff you come which you're very inspired about. But this guy back here maybe still judging it. Maybe you're coming to an audience like you do tonight, and you get a reaction. You also don't know what you're going to do tomorrow because you're really caught up in something.
Hazard. Life is hazard. I mean, life is risky. So what we tend to forget is that life is risky. We think that we can make it not risky by a certain way of living, which is appropriate to us. But there is no way of living that isn't risky. So when we live appropriate to ourselves as we might have been yesterday and continue to think that that is correct for us, we are taking a bigger risk of losing our consciousness and falling asleep. So once someone's able to wake up once, they remember the quality of that. And if that waking up quality is remembered, which it will be if it happens once consciously, then you never have to worry about whether you will be listening as a 5 year ago kind of person. The thing you have to worry about is that you will be taking the risk of being conscious. That's a big risk. First of all, no one around you is. I mean, you can't count on it. You can't. That's true. I mean, you suddenly will be alone with your own consciousness, right? So if I bring these tapes today, the only reason I'm able to listen to them tonight as though I never heard them before is because I know how alone I am. And I've come to terms with that. It's the being alone and being insecure that seems to quash everyone's actual creative attempts, because they're nothing but attempts out of a security. You see? I mean, I'm here, and I say, hey, it would be neat if I tried this, but I'm still here. In order to do this, I have to jump over there. And I won't be here anymore if I jump over there. And if I'm not used to not being here, I'm not going to jump. If I'm used to being here, I'm not going to jump over there unless I had an experience once of jumping and waking up. Then I'll know that even if I die when I jump over there, it'll be worth the jump. Because I could have died sitting over here. That's what, I know maybe there are other questions right now, but there's something that is really important, and this is something that I think has gotten under my skin, as they say a couple times. Music is not about music. Music is music, but it is not about music. It's like saying a book is about a book. It is about something that transcends the activity of music. In order to be potent in music, you have to talk and think and relate to things like this, like what we're talking about now. I've seen audiences when we get into this stuff and the people go, well, why doesn't he play? Or why don't we talk about the voicings? What were those voicings? How did you do the thing with 3 hands on the? Okay, great, but then that's that person's security. They fall asleep when someone else is trying to wake them up. Well, we all have to stay alert enough to wake up on our own and take anybody's help we can get. I remember bringing my car in to have it fixed, and I was all upset because we had trouble with the heating system on. It was like breaking down, and this was the 3rd time. And the secretary in the back of the office said, "It's only an object. You're all upset about an object." Take it when you can get it.
Yes, over here.
Some of your major and/or minor musical influences, and possibly a little bit of why.
Music doesn't influence music. Spirit influences music. I have been influenced by the spirit of people who were composers, who wrote music through which I could hear their spirit. And that made me realize that they knew what they were doing, because otherwise they would write music that didn't communicate anything. It's either one or the other. Either it's going to communicate nothing valuable, or it's going to communicate their spirit somehow. So naming names doesn't mean much, in that situation. By the way, one of the problems out here in the West is access to people who say they'll wake you up. Well, you see, you can't wake up by being accessible to something. You can wake up by an effort. If you don't have distance between yourself and the thing you aspire to, let's say, then you don't know the path from where you are to that thing. And if you don't know if you can't make your own path to that thing.
Is that a real worry in most cases?
Is that a real worry? What do you mean? No, it's not a real worry in most cases, because everything is governed by the same laws. People will stay asleep wherever they are, is what. or wake up wherever they are.
You were talking about hearing it and then playing it, and that the world needs to hear these tapes.
I didn't say that. I said, to me, this is what the earth wanted of me. Something like that. This is what the earth wanted to hear. I was in touch with something. It certainly wasn't the market.
My question deals with the word hearing and what special meaning it has for you.
Hearing, that's a good question. He said, what special meaning does hearing have for me? Hearing has all the meaning. Playing has none of it. Because in order to play, you have to hear what you are playing, and in order to play the first note, you have to hear the note before somehow. You have to hear the sound. You wouldn't desire it otherwise. And there's a big fallacy that seems to exist by the time you have a certain proficiency. You call yourself a musician. I mean, pianists play the piano, and trumpet players play the trumpet, and all those things, but musicians make music. And I think there's a difference. Well, anyway, I'm not sure I completely answered the thing about hearing, but that's all there is. There's nothing but that. Yeah, someone else had a...
I had a question about as I'm stumbling along and something creative comes out, not that I have a whole lot of choice about it. It's like as soon as I notice it, it goes away, or like I've lost it. I find it.
Can you say what he asked?
Yeah, he said as soon as he gets an idea and hears it, and it goes away immediately. So you've just about lost it. Are you a composer? Or
No,
are you talking about the medium of music, or?
Yeah, right. I might just pound the piano for a while, and something beautiful will come out of my pounding. And then when I see this beauty come out, it's like the beauty stops.
Yeah.
And I shed some light.
Can you hear that? You know what he said? Okay.
Well,
it's really...
he said he might be improvising on the piano and something very beautiful will come out, and as soon as he realizes that it's beautiful, then it stops being beautiful.
See, the realization of it being beautiful is a relative realization. That's what is wrong with that. You are saying, you are suddenly noticing that it's beautiful related to something that's not beautiful, which separates your involvement in that beauty. You're not any more involved in it. So you can't really create it. So it doesn't allow itself to, it can't be there. You know, it's like noticing it is like taking a photograph of it. I sort of asked him to ask this question because he spoke to me between these two parts, and I don't know how to be clear about this really, except that it's very important. There is noticing. There is a certain kind of noticing that does not split, and there's another kind of noticing. There's a noticing that's part of the process. In other words, part of what you're doing is noticing. But what you're talking about is a separate activity of noticing. Suddenly you notice that something's happening. That thing might have been happening for a while, maybe. Or you're separating something from something that will not allow itself to be separated, you know. A lot of people wonder why don't I edit the solo concerts, and one reason is that everything came from everything in it. You know, and I could take the parts I would say I notice are beautiful in the way that my musical self notices beautiful things, and separate them and release an album of those beautiful parts, and I think what we have is a piece of crap, you know, because they're integral. But that noticing takes energy, you know. You use energy to notice that. But there's a different kind of noticing that wouldn't...
When I'm hearing hearing is some relationship between that and hearing the note before you play it.
Well, in order to know what's happening next, you can't bother yourself with noticing how beautiful what you just played is.
Is there something you do halfway through the Cone concerts that, those are the most beautiful to me? To an 18-minute piece, is there something you do to keep your mind away from that, putting the energy into noticing?
Is there something you do to keep yourself from noticing how good something is going in the middle of the Cone concerts, for example?
Yeah, I would say so. There's something I do that keep myself from noticing. That's continue to play. Let my hands alone. If they start something, let them alone. They know what they're doing. I'm only there to hear it and supervise. But I'm not there to change what's going on.
What was the physical setup in the performance space at those concerts?
At that concert?
Yeah, that concert.
It was an opera house, modern building, wrong piano. We almost sent the engineers home because the piano was in such terrible condition, and they had brought the wrong one, and they had given their truck back, so they didn't have it. So we said, well, let them make a tape for us anyway.
This is the album which has sold more copies than any other piano record in history.
It also won awards for sound, which makes Manfred and I laugh all the time.
Question out here in the center.
Can you say something about how you feel about the relationship between your music, older and new, and its listeners?
And what?
And its listeners.
Its listeners. What's the relationship between your music, old and new, and the people who listen to it?
How you feel about that?
That's sort of abstract. What do you mean?
Well, obviously, an artist has to feel something about any kind of relationship between the music he produces and those who experience it.
Well, when you've started to play and you had no audience, I'm not sure whether that relationship... I mean, I played pretty well even when there was no one in the audience. I wonder what that was about. Yeah, that's secondary to the music itself. Perhaps there would be no solo concerts, but I'm not so sure that it might have changed history somehow, but history is a solid object anyway. And I'm not sure how to answer that. I'm not even sure what the question's about.
Well, how do you feel now about the fact that people still play these records?
Oh.
Is that what you want to know? Part of it.
I think people shouldn't listen so much to music. Including mine. I mean, I think I would prefer all the albums to be called back to the factory and have them melted down. That's how I feel about that.
Should people play their own music, or what do you suggest in its place?
What do you mean, play their own? Oh, well, if there were no music around, that's one thing that would happen. See, if they didn't have anything to relax to or to get interested in or to be fans of, they might become interested in making music. But I think that listeners listen too much in general to music. I mean, music doesn't come from music, as I said before. It comes from silence, if anything. If you want to participate in these tapes, you should participate also in the lack of them. That's... for me, it's a terrible job to mix these and prepare them because I don't want to hear them that much. They're too strong. I don't want to hear them that much. I don't want to think of them as things. They weren't things. They came and they went. I would like other people to hear them sometime, perhaps, but I don't care particularly when that is. It could be after I'm dead. It would be all right with me. But for me, they aren't supposed to become objects, and I don't think they should become objects to anyone. So when people start, doing their meditation therapy with the Colne concert and buying 60 of them every year because they wear out, that does bother me. Bothers the hell out of me, as a matter of fact. Why don't they use George Winston? I don't know. They do now, actually. No one realizes the real reason why I stopped solo concerts. It's because George Winston took over. And I thought, I prepared him, I got him ready, and I said, okay, guys. Because he takes the little things out of the cake, and the little raisins, and he doesn't leave any crumbs. And there's no building there. The building automatically appears. It's like it isn't erected. It exists automatically.
George, did you want to come up and reply to that?
Yeah.
I'm interested in this idea, I'm not sure I'm interpreting this right, that it's very important for you to have some kind of presence when you're playing. Is that, or that there's something that's alive that's happening when you're playing, but it's not really about playing music, it's more about being alive.
That's right.
Okay.
It's not anything to do with making. It's not anything to.
It's not about doing anything. It's about more about being an observer.
It's about being
Then what happens?
and doing.
Okay. Where does this whole question, though, of because there is something for me when I listen to your music that at moments I'm still able to feel this sense of life, something real, some kind of a presence that comes through.
Yes.
Not all the time, but there are moments. So, and I also hear what you're saying about it's very easy to use music. We hypnotize ourselves with music
Yeah.
a lot. We over-listen.
Yeah.
We use that to put ourselves to sleep. So where are you, what is then, do you have a responsibility? You seem to have this inner quest, and where's the relationship between what this inner question is for you, and yet being an artist in the world, a composer that makes his living this way? And I ask it sincerely, or is this still a question for you?
It's a very good question. And first of all, I think I am a privileged person to be able to speak. You see, there's a few interesting things about being famous. If you can become accidentally, let's say, famous without giving anything up for it, then you can represent something to people that they don't see very often. So if I have a responsibility, it's to keep the music pure enough that it can all, at any point in my so-called career, it clicks into that same place. If I have a responsibility, it's to show that that's possible, that that's conceivable, that it is not necessary, first of all, for someone to become stylistically, which is the smallest problem, really, because everyone does this, and it doesn't have any harmful effect, because someone will say, well, George Shearing, that's George Shearing, and that's George Shearing, and that's again George Shearing, and that's how we know it is, because he sounds like George Shearing. But what if an artist continues always to move towards, let's say, even more consciousness of what he's doing, not whatever that means. That might mean he doesn't show up in public to do concerts. But when he shows up to do anything, what he represents will be unassailable from an artistic standpoint, and unassailable from many standpoints, which makes it possible to talk about things like this. I mean, otherwise we'd end up having to talk about my music, my past music, because that's what I'd be proud of. I don't have any need other than to communicate whatever is necessary at a given time. And when I do that with music, it comes out the way it comes out. When I do this, I know I couldn't call in a substitute. So that's my responsibility, to stay alert to that. I don't know if that answers your question, but what you hear on the music is, on the records, is there, you know.
Are you having a good time?
I'm
asking this guy.
I'm having a hard time clarifying some things, but I'm having a very good time.
I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're doing it. A few more questions before we go home? Who's got the most important question? Over here.
I have an important one.
All right.
Me?
Yeah.
Do you ever get lonely?
No, because you see, when you accept being alone, loneliness doesn't exist.
What is loneliness to you then?
Loneliness is not knowing you're alone. And every once in a while wondering if you are or not. And thinking it's bad, you know, blah, 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 bad. For example, I've had some people say to me, they've had teachers, maybe spiritual teachers too, and they've told me what goes on. And I remember one time I said, did your teacher ever not be there when he told you there was going to be a meeting? Or I won't say what discipline this was, but there was a certain time when everyone was allowed to come and have their thing. And he said, no. And I said, well, did you ever think you might ever know more than he does? No, I never thought of that. Well, it's necessary for everyone to conceive of their own ability being transcending whatever they see around them. If they can't conceive of it, they can't do it. So whenever something special in the world that somebody does, it's bound to be partly because they've come to terms with the fact that if they're able to transcend something, they may be the only person that actually knows it. You know, I can't guarantee, I didn't know what would happen. I bring these tapes here. I don't know what happens to you. You know, I can get excited about it and I feel like a kid about it, but, you know, I still don't know how it affects you. I can only do the same thing I said before. I know how it affects me. If I know I'm objective when it affects me that way, I can know that it deserves to be out there. But that's being alone. You can't really tell anybody else what it means, you know. So I sit around and I can talk about the weather or the, you know, family or like politics or philosophy, and none of it is the truth for me. And that's a feeling of being alone, you know. I think the potential for that should be allowed in everyone. I mean, everyone should be able to deal with that. So the fluorescent light problem wouldn't happen, you know.
Do you get enjoyment from listening to other people's music now on record or playing it yourself?
The question is, do you get enjoyment from listening to other people's music on record or by playing it yourself?
Enjoyment. No. If I'm listening to music, I usually realize I have something better to do, even if it's my own. And that something better is to wake up more about what I'm doing and maybe do something more before.
How about tonight when you were listening to your own tapes?
You mean, did I have something better to do? I purposely set this up on jet lag, because on jet lag I never have anything better to do than sit around.
I think there are many composers who feel that way. I don't think you're alone in that. I think many people who write their own music feel that they would rather be thinking about and working on their own music than listening to a lot of people's music.
Yeah, and also enjoyment isn't why I listen to music. So I think I could number on one hand in the last few years the last 5 years, I could probably use just one hand to tell you the times I've heard music that moved me enough that I knew I was doing the right thing by listening to it, for me.
Would you care to say what one of those experiences was?
The last piano music that did that was the Sorabji.
Opus Clavicembalisticum.
Mhm.
This is a piano piece that goes on for over an hour, maybe.
It's longer, I guess.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was that, and some Handel.
Where did you hear that, by the way?
On
Did you-
record.
On a record, yeah.
Well, I can't remember at the moment what the others were, but I have to say something before I forget it, which is, see, the closer you get to the source of music, the closer you get to silence. The closer you get to silence, the less you can listen to things that aren't silence. But if you're a composer or a musician, when you play is when you hear music. When you don't play is when you don't hear music. And it can be very confusing to someone who's ready to be in that state to hear any sounds that are any kind of organized music at all. You know, no matter how great supposedly they are.
I hope you don't eat in restaurants.
Unfortunately, I do eat in restaurants. Yes. But I'm very loud at eating. And so I especially have soup a lot. Cream soup, mostly.
Yes, Greg.
When you listen to people you're playing with, I heard you at the Berkeley Community Theater, and there seemed to be moments when you were listening or communing with your fellow musicians.
Oh, definitely.
What's happening there?
Good things. I don't know what to say. I mean, that trio is a special entity that exists partly because we all lived long enough for it to exist. And we all went through things that we had to go through in order to play that way together. And we all know it. So that it's an anomaly, or it's not supposed to exist, this trio. It's against the rules. What we're playing is, in a way, banal, and what comes out is not, because we all know why we're doing it. And I don't know of another group that I've ever seen or worked with or heard about that knew that the way the three of us do. We all click into focus when we get ready to play. If I don't get any enjoyment from music, what do I get from it? Well, it takes up a lot of shelf space. I'm not sure what you mean, but I don't get anything. I don't get anything.
I think what Keith was saying was that many people feel that music is just for pleasure, and that it doesn't have intellectual qualities, that it doesn't make a statement on it in its own medium, and I think that's a mistake. I think you're missing a lot of what music is, and that's why we have these discussions, because we want to get beyond the experience that we've shared of just enjoying Keith Jarrett's music, but to find out more about what animates it.
How important is the character of the instrument you're playing and the setting that you're playing in compared to your internal creative process?
It depends on where, when, I mean, it's always different. Maybe in a given circumstance, the input I'm getting is so strong that it won't matter about anything. Maybe another time it's so delicate that it matters what color hair the person in the front row has. You know?
You said something earlier that raised a question in my mind. You said that at this certain point back in May, you came to have an understanding, or I'm paraphrasing, you came to know why you're here and what you're doing.
Again.
Again.
Yeah.
And it's that again that I found kind of interesting, actually. I was wondering whether you recognize a definite certain series of such experiences of recognition.
Yes.
And whether they might happen to correlate more or less with specific phases in your music.
Well, I wonder too.
The question had to do with his realization last May that he had found out again why he was placed here. And you mentioned that this had happened again. What were the other times, and do they correlate with phases in his musical development?
I don't know if they correlate with phases that could be recognized by a listener, but they correlate in themselves with actual steps toward the same recognition in a different way. For example, I remember the first time it was in Belgium, and I had a trio, and it was in the 60s. I remember the first time I said I was able to feel that I could go out on stage and play the piano, not play like Keith Jarrett plays. That was in the 60s, and there wasn't any pressure on me to have a style anyway, but artists tend to want to have a personal voice. And I had that, and I threw it away on stage in Belgium, and I remember that very, very distinctly. And that was one step towards throwing away more and more, shedding more and more ornament, you know, to my work, to the work that I'm doing. And I would say this, that when I said I realized why I was here again, I meant I had, before that thought, that I realized my purpose, and I knew it as much as I thought it was possible to know it. And in May, I knew it more than that. So it was like a birth, but it was the same thing. I mean, I know that I meant to be in music, for one thing. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But suddenly I realized that there was only one person who would do what I knew should be done, and since I couldn't communicate what should be done to anybody else, I had to do it, and that's why I was here. And so I started to do it without thinking about any of that.
You started as a classical musician, playing classical music, but if you hadn't been in touch with the great black musicians that you worked with and the improvisers, your development would have been entirely different. Is that right?
Well, except I was kind of weird as a kid, and I already was improvising before I heard any jazz at all. And there was usually, if I did a recital, there would be a piano piece that had some sort of motifs, but it would be like programmatic things, you know, like a thunderstorm or a jungle piece or something like that. See, I haven't moved very far. So in a way, it's the same realization I had when I was 5.
Is there a difference between improvisers and people who just play classical music spiritually?
There is an incredible difference that I wish I could explain, which blew my mind before May, and which was part of the reason why May happened. And that is that I was around classical musicians for 2 or 3 years constantly because I had to rehearse with them, perform with them, talk to conductors, meet them, meet the orchestra people, do recitals and work with classical people. And this was one of those things that gradually was happening and I didn't know it. Something was happening, but I didn't really see it yet. And then I had suddenly the trio was going to do their first tour after 2 years of not doing any concerts. And the day I got together with Gary and Jack, well, a few days after that in Japan, we were at dinner, and I realized that these guys were talking about music as though they loved it. Not as though it was something made up of many pieces, all of which were interesting, some of which were masterpieces, some which were not, and all of which they had to fit into their schedule that year, and many of which they played a zillion times and blah, blah, blah. But these two guys were talking as though they had just come out of the hospital being born, and they're talking about music. This is huge. It's just, do you remember back in blah, 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 when so-and-so played? Yeah. Emotion. Oh, okay. Yeah, I want to end with this, though.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I'll do that and then I'll put that on.
Okay.
They can walk out during it or something.
Okay, good. We're going to have some more music, okay? And then we'll call it a night.
I hope I'm right where I am. Where I am.
That was an excerpt from the Well-Tempered Clavier played on Keith's harpsichord at home, I take it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's.
What is that instrument?
It is a Carl Fudge built it. He's in Massachusetts, and it's a copy of a French two-manual Taskin harpsichord, who's well known for his big-sounding harpsichords long ago.
What's this last piece?
This is just another thing from this that would be good going out music or staying in or whatever until it's over. Whatever you want to do, I guess.
Whose idea was it to call this the Master's Voice?
Oh, that was the copywriter back there in the design room.
Is this going to be broadcast?
This is being recorded for broadcast, and when we haven't, we don't know if it ever will be broadcast. Yeah. Yeah, if you subscribe to KPFA, we'll let you know.
Don't listen. I'm not ready yet.
More of,
Yeah, same time.
more of what? Are you asking Keith Jarrett if he's going to appear like this and do more of these things? More of these tapes.
I don't really know. it's sort of all there already, but I live near those instruments, so now and then they do tell me a few things that I haven't yet finished. They say, we have some unfinished business with you, Mr. Jarrett. And one of those things, this is a good example because I thought I was finished with these tapes and then this happened. Not that. This.
Keith Jarrett, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.